Welcome to the Walled Garden Podcast. Here we nourish the gardens of our minds, one meaningful conversation at a time. If you'd like to find out more, go to thewalledgarden.com. Thanks for joining us. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Walled Garden Podcast. So this week, we actually have an interview with a very close friend of Sharon Lebell's. His name is Peter Samis, and so Sharon spearheaded this whole operation to get Peter on the show, and it was such an honor to speak to this beautiful human being. And I wanted to start this episode, before I introduce Peter fully, I wanted to read a piece of poetry that I think sets us up for the kind of conversation that we're having today. Because I was recently, just this morning, I was interviewed on Mark Divine's podcast, The Mark Divine Show. You should go check it out. He's a very interesting fellow, was in the US Marines, I believe, Special Operations. And he's also a yogi, a very committed spiritual traveler, and so that combination is very interesting. And Mark is a beautiful person, and he actually read me a piece of poetry that I wrote to kind of start one of his questions on the show this morning. And I thought, wow, okay. He took something away from that. That's really beautiful. And I think that this piece actually really sets us up for the kind of conversation that we're going to hear on the show today with Peter Samis, myself, and Sharon Lebell. I also want to mention before I read this that I was looking through the website to find this poem, and I came across this other one that I had written. It's called As Above, So Below. It's a hymn/prayer. And I thought you guys might like to know, if you weren't privileged enough to have read this one before I've just edited it, it says, as above, so below, let thy Holy Spirit flow from thy sacred place on high into our hearts and souls and minds. But I just edited it because I went on there to read this, and it said, as above, so below, let thy moly spirit flow. And I thought that was quite a hilarious mistake. So I've taken a picture of that for future memory. Anyway, nonetheless, let's move on. I'm going to get to the point here. I'm going to read this piece. So this piece is called Have a Think. It goes like this. Have a think about these things. What do you do? Why do you do it? Do you do it, or does it do you? What is of great worth? What is desirable? What is undesirable? What helps? What hinders? What gives? What is given? What takes? What is taken? Have a think about these things. What is wisdom? What is truth? What is it to discern? What is it to be humble? What is it to be aware? What is it to be? What is it to become? What is it to be one? What is it to be naught? So that's that poem, and if you want to hear a further discussion on that, then I'll share with all of you the episode that I just did on Mark Divine's show when that comes out. But I really think that sets us up correctly, appropriately, for the conversation that you're about to hear, as I said, between myself, Peter Samis, and Sharon. Because Peter is a human being awake. You know, he is a human being who knows how to ask questions deeply. He knows how to posit the right kinds of questions. He's a person who is open, very widely to the experience of life and to everything that could be experienced if we would just get our aim right. And I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation because Peter is the kind of person who, as I said, he's just extremely open to the possibilities of the human experience. And you'll see what I mean by that when you start listening to him. And the wisdom that he shares is deep and profound and meaningful and important. You might say vital, especially for these times that we're currently living in. And so for me, this was just a conversation that delivered so many profound insights that I found myself saying, I need to kind of go away and sit with these ideas, as Sharon would say, not yes, not no, just sit with these ideas. They've already been seeping into my soul over the past few weeks since we had this conversation. But nonetheless, I think that's enough praise for Peter for now. Instead of introducing Peter and telling you all about him, I'm actually just going to let Sharon do the honors because she does such a beautiful introduction of Peter, and he obviously shares a little bit of information about himself as well. And so I'll let these two beautiful human beings do the talking. So with that said, I do just want to mention a couple more things before we dive in. I'm sorry. I know I kind of set us up there to go straight into the interview, but nonetheless, I'm going to steal some more of your time. If you haven't been to the Walled Garden website in a while, go there and check it out. I've recently made some changes to better reflect the mission that we're on there, and it's looking pretty nice, I might say so myself. But more importantly, head over to the events page, thewalledgarden.com/events. We've got some pretty awesome events coming up in the Walled Garden this month, and we would really love to see any of you there. We've got some stellar guests on the show, so I'll give you some examples. So we have Shane Trotter, who's going to be talking with us about overcoming the pull towards human devolution. And our good friend Brandon Tumblin from the Strong Stoic podcast is going to be attending that one as well and joining in the interview. That one's coming up on March 11th. Then we have Ryan Driscoll from the Stoic Warfighters podcast. He's going to be talking to us with Leonidas Konstantikos as well, which I'm very excited about. They're going to be talking to us about Stoicism and the military. So that's coming up on March 12th. We've got our Soul Searching with Seneca meetups coming up, one this coming Sunday and then one 2 weeks from then. We have Ranjini George, Dr. Ranjini George, talking about what we can learn from a Zen monk and a Roman emperor. That's going to be a very fascinating conversation on the 16th. Then coming up next month, we also have Karen Duffy, the actress, and also you've probably seen her at Stoicon. She's going to be talking about her new book, Wise Up. So that one's available there as well. And we also have a really great conversation coming up with Mark Vernon, who recently wrote a book about the spiritual path in Dante's Divine Comedy. So we're going to be discussing Stoicism, Christianity, and Dante's Divine Comedy with Mark Vernon there. So just some brilliant guests coming up. We've got plenty of events there. Go to thewalledgarden.com/events, and we'd just love to see you there because it's such a great opportunity for us to all get together and share in that communal meaning making, that communal philosophizing, and ask questions of our guests and to really engage in these conversations and to learn and grow and strengthen each other in the process. So we'd love to see you there. As I said, head over to that website. And I think with that said, I should probably get out of your hair now. It's almost 10 minutes and we haven't even got into the conversation, but nonetheless, here is a conversation between myself, Sharon Lebell, and Peter Samis. Enjoy.
This is a very special day for me because I get to introduce two people whom I consider not only friends, but pillars of my world. The two of you you're my desert island friends, the people I could never leave behind. So, Simon Drew, I present to you Peter Samis. Peter Samis, this is Simon Drew.
Simon, Peter, it is such a pleasure, and I've come to understand that anybody who Sharon says you have to talk to this person is a person that I have to talk to, because she is she is
your unerring pilot and guide in certain uncharted waters.
That's exactly what Sharon is. She is my unerring guide and pilot. Yes, 100%. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming and having this conversation.
Sure. Yeah, well, we'll see where it goes. I'm open to it.
We'll see where it goes.
Yeah. and Simon, are you in Melbourne, or are you where are you in Australia?
Up in the beautiful Sunshine Coast, just above Brisbane. So
Brisbane.
Yeah. Okay. And how about yourself, Peter?
The People's Republic of Berkeley, California.
Yeah, okay. I love it. Do you live close by to Sharon?
Pretty close. I mean, it's not. I just drove by where Sharon lived when we met, because I was heading north through Berkeley from Oakland, and I thought, and I was passing what used to be the site of Bernard's Market, which was which is around the corner from Milvia Street, where Sharon once lived. But Sharon now lives.
Wait. Asterisk. I lived in Allen Ginsberg's former apartment. Just saying.
Actually, he lived at that address in a cottage, and they tore down the cottage, and they built these apartment buildings that were like made of ticky-tacky, and they sold them to students. They rented them to students. And Sharon was absolutely on that turf, on that sacred terrain. That is totally true.
It's a place of
and
greatness.
I studied with Allen Ginsberg, actually, in '78. We both went to the Naropa Institute at one time or another. We have
yes, we did.
We have a few connections.
Yeah, well, do you want to maybe start with, how did you two fall into each other's lives?
Oh, I get to do that.
I get to make annotations.
I'm taking the reins, and Peter can supplement afterwards.
Okay, it's a deal. Go for it.
All I can say is that sometimes we're lucky enough to meet people who just get it, who just get us. People from whom you can learn and grow for the rest of your life. And I knew Peter would be a fitting asset to the Walled Gardens mission of rediscovering the mystery and grandeur of existence through these honest, open conversations we've established about the most important topics. So I'll introduce Peter informally, and then he gets to introduce himself. So how did we meet? Several decades ago, Peter and I met. Was it accidentally? Was it fatefully? We were both young students waiting in a long, boring line at the financial aid office at the University of California, Berkeley.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was wearing my uniform, which were painter's overalls. And I happened to be sporting a baseball cap with the Danish philosopher Kierkegaard. His name was emblazoned on the front. And
not your average baseball cap.
Right. So I spied a mischievous looking man ahead of me in the queue. And
actually, I was both ahead of you and behind you, because I had arrived in the queue and I saw how long it was. And I thought, I'm just going to go to the bathroom and I'll come back. And then when I came back, there was Sharon wearing her Kierkegaard baseball cap at the end of the queue. So I stepped up. Go ahead. Take it from there.
Okay. Well, Peter...
Get the story right, Sharon. Come on.
She couldn't have known. Yeah, she couldn't have.
So Peter kind of got in my space and said, "Did you remember to take your leap of faith today?" And
I said, either play the first or to second. The dread of stealing home. Go ahead.
Well, I pondered his words, and then I shot back, "Will you marry me?" And it was like we were in an invisible bubble together, kind of sequestered from the mundanity of our shared task of seeking funds for our educations. And what happened was, in that moment, we were tacitly sharing an agreement to entwine our destinies. So Peter and I never married in the conventional or romantic sense. We're both happily married to other people. But I would say that since that moment, we have been joined in a vital marriage of mind and spirit, which is to say, we're lifelong philosophical friends in the classical sense. And our conversational journeys, they reliably take us to insightful, if unpredictable places. So I should mention that Peter Samis is an author, an international speaker, and has had a distinguished career with the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And one of his specialties is how we see the world through various perceptual frames, and how we derive meaning from art and from life itself. So I've titled our conversation, just to have something of a rudder, I'm calling it Ways of Seeing, What We See, What We Don't, Why It Matters. And Simon, I'd like to encourage you to jump into this conversation anytime, because the three of us belong together. But first, Peter, I'd like you to introduce yourself to our listeners in your own way, so our listeners have a broader idea of what kind of work you've done and the questions and principles that have guided you across your career and your life more generally. And then, if we have time, I might have a few more questions for you.
Small order. So As Sharon said, my name is Peter Samis, and I've lived in my chosen home republic of Berkeley now for since 1983, which would be the year that actually Sharon and I met. And my interests have been many, but also simple, and underlying them all are a few guiding threads. When Sharon was on that financial aid line, she was wrapping up her studies at a certain point in her life, that coming toward the end, and I was beginning my graduate studies in art history, which would lead to the possibility of working at the museums I worked at, one of them SFMOMA, for 30 years at SFMOMA. So clearly, career-wise, the big arc and the book that I published and all the and my renommée, as the French would say, my reputation. Well, since I have a global reputation, it's in a very kind of small world that is still a cosmopolitan one that goes around the world. That's a museum world. And the art museum world in particular, but the museum world, because my interest was never just in. My interest in visual art was because I was looking for ways to express the inexpressible in a nonlinear format. And words, of course, are confined to that kind of the marching ants across the page. And a visual representation has the virtue of being simultaneous everywhere that you're looking. Maybe you take it all in a glance, in your first, standing in front of it, and you're embodied, and you're there, and you're seeing it, and then you might have an itinerary that takes you through it. But all the information is displayed from the get-go. And that seemed, at the time in particular, that seemed important to me. And it felt like visual artists, in a sense, had an edge on writers in that way, at least. So there's more behind that. We can unpack that later. But that said, no sooner did I start working in art museums than I realized that maybe not so much. There are a lot of people who go buy paintings and artworks on roller skates and don't stop for them at all and say, "Oh, I don't know anything about art. Don't ask me to tell you to talk about that." Right? So there's so what I ended up finding myself doing in my career was helping to connect people and artworks and serving as a bridge between the worldviews of the artists that led them to create and work in certain forms, and visitors who came with no single profile, but a vast continuum of receptivities and intelligences and sensitivities that would either connect or fail to with many artworks. So that was that kind of that was the gist of my career. And it just so happened that in the early 90s, which is now a long time ago, we were moving from this linear thing, called prose, to something new, like what we're talking on right now, which is, video and imaging and sound all being transmitted through a computer screen. And that was a brand new capacity at the time. In the late 80s, you could not have a video on a computer screen. You could barely have color on a computer screen. And so the early 90s, so what that did was it blew open the methods of communicating. And it blew them open in such a creative and powerful way that it's almost hard to imagine now because they've almost gotten less creative since then. We've kind of fallen into well-established patterns. We know what web pages look like. We know what magazines look like on the web. We know what newspapers look like on the web. We know what YouTube looks like. All these things are now such established, instantiated forms that they don't allow for a really deep creative exploration environment the way the early 90s, when it seemed like digital media, multimedia, as it was called back then, you could articulate, you could design an exploration environment for any topic. And the process of uncovering and discovering and navigating through that environment was part of the process of apprenticeship to the domain, the knowledge domain you were apprenticing to, and you were interested in mastering.
Well, Peter.
Yeah.
Yeah, about this apprenticeship.
Yes.
That puts me in mind of the fact that you have always valued and excelled at what we are calling in this conversation seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And by seeing, we're of course talking about not just noticing what's in one's visual field,
mm-hmm.
but the noting of the synchronous meanings that inhere in a work of art, a conversational exchange, or even a kind of extra perception of wisdom. So I'm curious what seeing means to you.
Mm-hmm.
Not in a conclusive
mm-hmm.
way,
mm-hmm.
but what does seeing mean to you?
Mm. It's so multi-leveled, as you are fond of saying. When we're at our best, it's many meanings all happening
at once.
Yeah. which for me is the definition of a symbol. Symbolism.
Yes.
Yeah, symbolism is that you're looking at something that's a surface dictionary definition, and then it has all these other valences that come with, that ride on the back, that are indissociable. If you've got those sensitivities when you look at that visual surface.
Well, okay, just to be a brat for a second.
Yeah, go for it.
So what's so great about seeing?
What's so great about seeing? Yeah, well, I mean, frankly, it's like the first line of my my thesis when I was studying abroad in Paris was parler et pécher. Nothing. To speak is to sin. Nothing is as whole as silence. So, similarly, seeing, you can be seeing in the dark. I mean, some of the people who to me are the most clairvoyant, which means clear seeing, are people who are blind legally.
Yes.
I think of two. I think of one who's young and one who's young and brilliant and can read at 900 words a minute, which is about 4 times my speed. And but he does it by listening, because it's spoken out loud, and he just kind of scrubs through, and he can hear it, and his brain can detect the signals and the differences and the variations in tonality, and he can absorb at that speed, which is brilliant. But he can't see.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one I think of is a friend that, Sharon, you knew, and who died at 108 and a half, and who was actually a picture dealer, coincidentally. And he continued to sell paintings and prints even after he was legally blind.
That is amazing.
Because he could see. Because he could see.
And sometimes, and no one who came into his gallery had any idea how blind he was. But he knew, more or less, he had sight earlier and lost it through macular degeneration. Tragic story. He was almost inclined to commit suicide at that time because that so important to him was his vision. But he didn't. He had another expression, which was, I'll say it in French and then I'll translate it, garce de vie, je te tiens à la gorge, which means, bitch of a life, I've got you by the throat. You won't have me. Yeah.
Wow. I love that. Sharon, that's the new motto for the walled garden.
Yes.
Bitch of the life. I have you by the throat.
You won't get me yet.
Well, okay, Peter.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking seeing, it can also be a kind of revelation, right?
Yes.
And I know that you've had some pivotal epiphanies in your life, your word. And these epiphanies have formed who you are and what you most value.
That's
and I was wondering if you'd be willing to either describe your epiphanies or tell us what they came to mean to you, or ideally both.
Yeah, I think both is better because otherwise it's too abstract.
Yeah.
I've been writing about this recently, actually. Again. And I'll just outline the three of them quickly, hopefully quickly. The first one was when I was just in high school, and I was reading a book by Alan Watts. And it was actually, speaking of seeing, the book, on the taboo against knowing who you are. And the whole point of that book is, it's basically, it's kind of Vedanta for dummies. But it's like all of about 120 pages. And it's got, on one page, there are these two diagrams. And one is a squiggle, kind of a free-form line. And the other is a squiggle captured in a grid. And Alan Watts's point is that life is like the squiggle. But our experience of life as we become adults and get educated, perhaps overeducated, and categorical about everything, is the grid. And when you're living and seeing through the grid, then you're seeing basically this part of the squiggle as in, square E5, this part of the squiggle in square D, 4 or whatever, and so on and so forth on through, and you're missing the forest for the trees, right? You're missing the vitality, the motion, the kineticism, right? Of this world that's constantly emergent and constantly surprising us. And like, I go and I duck into the restroom when I come back, and suddenly there's this woman in overalls with a Kierkegaard cap on. That is not in that diagrammatic squiggle. I'm sorry, And because I wasn't in the diagrammatic box that said I'm in line right now, it's like elevator behavior. No one talks to anybody. We sparked, right? Because we're both spontaneous and in the present. Okay, so for me, Watts's insight or the aha that I got from that was that all the categories that we have with which we enumerate and all the and that enable us to take the calipers of intellect and make syllogistic proofs and everything else are overlays onto a fundamentally seamless cosmos of which we are ourselves emergent and eventually dissolving parts.
Can I jump in with a question here?
Yeah, sure.
So this seems so perfectly aligned with what I was just talking about with Brandon from the Strong Stoic podcast. I just had a conversation with him for our show, and we were talking about the fact that you can't reason your way out of an experience with something like music, and this is something that Jordan Peterson often talks about. He's like, if you're at a concert, you're tapping your feet and you're like right in there with the beat, and then somebody says, well, it's just a whole bunch of sound, right? And you're like, shut up, I'm listening to the music, like that. You can't reason your way out of that deep experience. And I want to maybe be as selfish as to share a story from my own life and maybe get you to comment on what's happening there, because there was this moment when I was young. I was accepted to go to this competition for singing with James Morrison. He's this amazing trumpeter from down here. He plays every instrument except for the drums. He literally has a big band album where he plays every instrument in the big band. And but I went down there, and one of the groups that was there was the Idea of North, this beautiful vocal quartet from Australia. I love these guys. And they started to introduce a song that they were going to sing. It was called Ode to Ollie. And it's a song that was actually composed by one of my vocal teachers from the conservatorium. And it's about how whenever life gets difficult for her, she thinks of her son, Ollie, and she can smile and she can come back to some sense of groundedness, you might say. And they introduced this song, and then they started singing. And I'd never had an experience like this in my life, but about 30 seconds into the song, I just start weeping uncontrollably. And everybody's around. I'm like putting my sunglasses on. I'm like, what is happening? I had no idea what was happening, but just hearing the harmonies here, but even to say, just hearing the harmonies, it's like that doesn't take into account the fullness of what was happening in that moment. But I could never fully describe what was happening in that moment. But something about this song just made me weep uncontrollably. I'd never cried like that with music before. And I just wonder what's happening in that moment, because I'm sure other people have had experiences like that.
Yeah. Well, Sharon, you spend so much of your time playing music for people in all kinds of different situations. What's your own sense of that? And then I'm happy to add my own my 2 cents after.
My first thought was when a musician, and probably when any artist, any person is all in to what they're expressing, singing about Ollie, me playing with my sticks on my strings, as if life itself depended on it, not to prove anything, but just because this is what we're here to do in this moment. The thing is, I think we are dialogic creatures. I think we need someone to catch the ball. I think when someone makes music and they're all in, or paints a painting, et cetera, fill the blank, and then someone catches the ball. I think you caught the ball, Simon. I think you caught the ball and completed the circuit.
But what's funny about it, Sharon, is sometimes you don't choose to catch the ball just hits you.
The ball
That's it.
The ball bowls you over.
That's it. Simon, that's it. Over
It's
to
tough
you,
because
Peter.
can you teach that?
Right. I don't think so, but I think
No,
you
you
can
consider
make
yourself lucky
you
when you
can make
feel it.
yourself accessible.
Yeah.
I think you can make yourself accessible.
Yeah.
And it has something to do with an open heart.
Sorry, Peter, I'll let you jump in now.
No, not at
No, not at all. That's perfect. Well, I mean, this ties in with my second epiphany, and my third, frankly. But they were both music based, partly at least. After high school, I went to enrolled in matriculated in college at Columbia University, and was rather quickly, and loved my courses. But was rather quickly convinced that I wasn't really that my life was going to be kind of predictable and confined within certain social norms and boundaries, and I wasn't going to fully understand either what Watts had talked about or what welcome to the aftermath of the 1960s. This is the mid-1970s, or what people like Aldous Huxley and Carlos Castaneda, who Sharon can tell you more about him another time. It's not all good. We're describing. And I decided it was time to actually do something that I hadn't anticipated doing in my life, which was to step outside the magic circle of my culture in a way, or of my language, and to try LSD. And as part of my research, basically. It wasn't like to get, let's look at some cool hallucinations. And that first trip with two friends at Columbia, in my dorm, starting in my dorm room, we did the classic thing, the time-honored thing. We put on record albums, and the first thing we listened to was the initiation album par excellence, Jimi Hendrix, "Are You Experienced?" Hendrix was already dead, but this album was quite alive. And it's designed as a tool for opening your mind and your heart and your soul. It's not always easy. It takes you through some very difficult, grinding spaces. I came to think of it as Jean-Paul Sartre's being and nothingness on two sides of a vinyl disc, because it really, 40 minutes, it's a lot less time to listen to than Sartre's impenetrable tome does to read. But the power is right there. And so it, including the last song on the first side, which is called "I Don't Live Today." And by the end of the song, you feel like he's kind of dying on you. He starts coughing. He starts kind of mumbling, muttering, and the music slows down to a trudge, and then it falls apart. It kind of disintegrates. And it just feels like he's going to leave you in the pit of depression and dissolution. And then he comes back. He comes like roaring, back. The momentum is, incontrovertible. He's, and he starts yelling. He's like, yeah, right, and he's back in life again. And all I could do, as I was listening to this, was like stand up out of respect. I would, if I had been wearing a hat, I would have taken it off to him. And there's a lot more on the album, and there he goes a lot of other places and takes you through all that. But that was like the beginning of our trip So I've always thought of that trip as my New York existentialist trip. It's like in the face of complete bleak despair and desperation, there is an affirmation here that I will make my own meaning. I will stand up. I will come back to life. Right. The other thing that happened on that trip was we went up to the top of a bell tower in a church, and we looked out over the campus of Columbia, which was right a few blocks away from that Riverside church, and we saw all these buildings on campus that looked so prestigious and so turn of the century, being turn of the early 1900s. They're very they're very kind of, they're not exactly neoclassical, because they don't all have columns in front of them, but it's a kind of Renaissance inspired architecture, I would say, probably, and they harmonize together. The entire campus was designed by McKim, Mead and White, and they were the leading firm. They did the New York Public Library, the Metropolitan Opera. They were the prestigious firm at the turn of the century, the early 1900s, and it felt like and there were these white stripes or kind of cream-colored stripes against the red brick on all of the buildings. It felt like they were kind of like gift wrapping. Like these were the ribbons on the buildings that tied them all up into neat little packages, and that was the philosophy box, and there was the chemistry box, and there was the, and so on and so forth, the physics box or the journalism box. All the different boxes of the university were clearly identified and had the ribbon around them, and it felt like, okay, we're back to Watts. I suddenly saw the library, Butler Library, with its like 4 million volumes, as like a laboratory, and every single book as like little extractions of labeled and bottled knowledge. That have been coded into these linear threads of text, of typography. But what I was really understanding wasn't linear threads of typography. It was something far vaster and more visceral and more, impactful. The kinds of things you felt in that, listening to that chorus, the kinds of things I had been feeling with Hendrix grinding through my guts, the kind of things other people feel through dancing, or we all feel through dancing. It's a very different quality of knowledge and of being alive and knowing being that can't be reduced to this little thread of like a fly going through a sphere. Right. So that was the second big epiphany for me, that that all of these subject areas are taxonomies that we impose upon the world, and the world remains united and fundamentally continuous, and exists independently of all of our analytical lenses that we impose upon it. Right.
It sounds like a very expansive way of looking at the world. I think that one of the more interesting things that I'm always calling upon Jordan Peterson, because he's been a teacher who I've just dived into lately, and he seems like somebody who really understands the role of artists as well. And one of the things that he points out about books is, well, you think, okay, it's a book, but no, it's not just a book. It's like it's a word that's nested within a sentence, that's nested within a paragraph, within a chapter, within a book, within a culture, within a world, within a cosmos. Right. It's like you can keep on expanding and expanding, and you realize that it's very strange what we're all doing here. and like you say, we do really like to. I'm gonna throw it over to Sharon, because I want to hear what Sharon has to ask in this circumstance.
Okay, but I've got one more thing to say to build on what you said, which is that
please.
when you said it's a word within a sentence, within a paragraph, and the tree and the hole in the ground, the green grass grow all around, green grass grow, there's all of that interconnectedness, and because the culture, it all depends on the culture. That goes right back to what Sharon was studying when I met her, which was semiotics, and the interrelations, and you should talk about that a little bit. How the cultural ground makes possible certain kinds of thoughts and not other kinds of thoughts.
Right. Well, I'm afraid of taking us too far afield, and I've only heard 2 out of 3 epiphanies.
Yes,
so
I
would like to bring you back to epiphany number 3, so you can tie them all together.
Okay. But then I will say that I too had some. I did frequent semioticians shortly after these years, or shortly after the experiences I'm talking about here, when I was in Paris and studied with some of the leading thinkers at that time. But
Peter, can you explain to our listeners what is semiotics?
I think you should do that.
No. We're interviewing you.
Yeah. I know we're having a dialogue. We're all talking. We're all contributing. Anyway, I'll go into my third epiphany.
Okay.
And then we can talk about semiotics later if you want. So the third epiphany was also one of the outcomes of that New York experience was a desire to live in a place where you could say yes to the world around you, in a way that you can't if you're tripping on LSD in Times Square or in the New York subway, because they're kind of brutal. There's a lot that you're fencing. We filter out so much, and we don't even know it, right? Because that's the way we live in the world. That's the way we make it through a city. So one of my friends and I decided, how about if we go to Berkeley next year? Basically, we had both considered applying to Berkeley for college, for university, and both of our mothers had said, "Oh, wait for grad school for that. We don't want you so far away so soon," and all that stuff. So, but at this point, it became a matter of some urgency to us to get out of New York. California was very appealing, and so we did apply to Berkeley, and as at least for a year's leave of absence from Columbia, we were going to try. We hitchhiked cross country, came to Berkeley, started studying like a house of fire. And at the end of 2 quarters at Berkeley, I did decide to take LSD one last time. And that was for a concert, because here I was in the sacred grounds of the 60s, the Bay Area. There was going to be an outdoor concert at Golden Gate Park with a group that had formerly been known as the Jefferson Airplane and was now largely reconstituted as the Jefferson Starship. And they were going to be and other groups were also playing and I thought, okay, I'm going to go out and go to this concert. And in that concert, in a field, in a meadow with 20,000 other people, after a very intensive academic 2 quarters, my mind was kind of shot. Not just my mind. In many ways, I would say my awareness, my consciousness, shot out of my body, and looked down at myself, and I saw myself dancing on the hill, and laughing, and I was laughing from above, looking down at myself dancing on the hill. I was thinking, oh my God, people think that's who I am. That kind of guy with the receding hairline and the dancing his full brains out on the hill there. That people think, in that Greek shirt or whatever, people think that's who I am, as if that were it. But I felt like I was one with everything that was going on in the park.
And so was that the message then to you?
The message was
the oneness, or
the oneness was the message, the oneness, and that my little arbitrary identity that was encapsulated on a driver's license, some kind of a card I would carry in my wallet, or or in a street address, like if the police, wanted to find me, where they would find me, or or in a phone number. These things were just, like these tethers of this particular little body on the planet, but I was participating and partaking of something that was so much vaster.
Yeah.
And it felt actually rather arbitrary that I would actually go back to that particular address, and resume that particular identity instead of like any other life path that one might have on this planet. So, when I had, I kind of progressively deconstructed in these different epiphanies, categories, fields of knowledge, and even my own sense of separateness as an individual. And it felt like that was all truer than the stories that were being told to me and peddled to me in my classes, and in my readings. So as I've recently written, ever since I dropped LSD, I've been confused about who I am.
I might ask something here, because it seems to me like that's almost a necessity for the artist to try and go beyond those boundaries, those boxes that we so often live in. But is that something that you think is, that can be really destabilizing for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it seems to me like it's almost a tool of the trade of the artist, but not necessarily something that you would say, everybody go out there and
not recommended at your local doctor's office.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you think of that?
I think it's really interesting. I think you're right. It's so, but it's good to know. It's good to know that these things are artifices and that these things are constructions. It's not good to completely lose your tether. And as I've been thinking about this lately, I flashed on a scene. I could read it to you if you'd like. I've just written it up. Should I read it to you? It's just a couple of paragraphs. Let me just see if I can find it.
Please, yeah.
Yeah. Here. Oh, by the way, here is, can I share screen, or is that not
sure,
an option? Make me co-host or whatever it takes, or let all.
Can you see this share, the green share button now?
Yeah.
So if you click on that.
There, I can do that. Okay. First, I'm going to show you the two Alan Watts drawings.
Oh, cool. Love it.
Yeah. And then move down here. Oh, see. Sorry, just take a minute to get there.
It's fine.
Oh, this is a great cartoon, by the way, by a French 19th century printmaker named Paul Gavarni. And it is basically a homeless person, a crippled homeless person, a lame homeless person in Paris, looking at all these students who are all declaiming about all their grand theories of the world. And he's saying, Ego, 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 tous ego, 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 tous ego. They all sound the same word in French, same sound at least. But in English, it's ego, 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 all equal. Okay, we're going to move on. Let me see if I can find this. It's further
Man, I
along
fall
than
into that pattern so often.
Let me find it. Here we go. Okay. Now we don't need to share this anymore. I'm going to stop the share. I'll just read it. In the summer, I would occasionally go out to Long Island, which is right outside of New York for those who are down under, and visit the local pool with my mom. This had been a familiar terrain during my childhood. There, a few steps down the slope, was the round kiddie pool where I had splashed about before I knew how to swim. The pool entrance and locker rooms lay further off to my left. There, I had progressed from being a toddler helped by my mom on the women's side to a young boy accompanying my brother or dad on the men's, in the locker rooms, that is. In front of me was the adult pool, the racing lanes marked off on the bottom with painted stripes, its blue-green water surface gently bobbing. Mothers tended to their young children around the edges. Skinny teenage girls in two-piece bathing suits stretched out on the lounge chairs, tending to their tans. And on a grassy slope above the pool on the other side, I saw something, or rather someone, new. He was seated on a white pool towel in full lotus pose. A freckled, bare-chested, red-headed man in a bathing suit, roughly my age, perhaps a little older, who was silently looking out over the scene before him. He was silent, but a slight smile animated the edges of his mouth. His energy was of a completely different quality than the activity around the poolside. I picked up on it immediately. From the point of view of the families on the pool apron, busied as the mothers were with the application of suntan cream to the bodies of their squirming children, or the teenage girls, oblivious to anything but the sheer baking heat of the sun on their bodies, browning themselves as surely as a hot dog on a roller cooker, he may as well not have been there at all. But for me, his presence was preeminent. He was tuning. Each other person was fully involved in her or his activities du jour, parenting, playing, or preparing their bodies for teen mating rituals. But there he was, sitting up on the hill in lotus pose, silently rooted, eyes half open, sensing the whole field. Although I had never met him before, I recognized him. So I recently, I got where he was coming from. I got where the people around the apron were coming from. He took it all in. I recently posted on Facebook as I was thinking about this man. Has anyone heard of or heard about whatever became of LH? And no one seemed to know. But one person said they thought that he had. The last time they'd seen him, he looked like he had been doing too many drugs, and they didn't know. They didn't sound optimistic. So this, by way of response to your question, which is that, on the one hand, there's this profound knowledge. He was in effect the Hindu sadhu by the Ganges, except he was on the lawn of a suburban pool. Could have been in Australia, could have been in Los Angeles, could have been in New York suburbs. But on the other hand, there is risk involved in going that deep and that far and dissociating from your own individuality and your own embodied presence on the planet.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. What do you think is the sign that one would get too close to that danger? What is the point of perhaps return to the world? When must that happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that love is a really good healer because it brings us back to our bodies. And so just the holding of another person as opposed to the spinning out, because we do live in our bodies. We're embodied beings. This is our passage on the planet. So even if our awareness, consciousness, spirit, whatever your soul, whatever you want to call it, partakes of something far vaster, we've got this path to ply that goes through these, you know, myriad moments, some of them feeling like drudgery and trudging, and others like magic, like when Sharon and I met, and synchronicity, gives you suddenly the feeling of, oh, well, we were meant to be here.
Yeah.
So we've got a path, clearly. And in a sense, when I took LSD, I realized I was taking myself out of the path that had been, in a sense, foreordained for me, and methodically offering myself challenges that were not necessary for me to be successful in society, but they were necessary for me for other reasons, because I had a questing intelligence that continually wanted to be challenged, and until I was challenged out the wazoo, I wasn't going to be satisfied.
Yeah. Well, there's so much richness here. Peter, I'd like to circle back a little bit.
Yeah.
To some things we were talking about earlier. You've spent most of your adult life immersed in and representing the art world and helping people have accessible relationships to art. So let's get back to basics. Why is art important? People often say art is what makes us human or keeps us human. What does that mean? And how can we rescue art from elitism's clutches?
Yeah, right. Exactly. I was going to say, art is kind of probably both overrated and underrated. When it's elite art world, art market hoopla and hype, it's overrated, and certain anointed people are getting ungodly sums for things that there's no sense of proportion. It's just a collector's market, and it's more about the international oligarchs having some transactional commodities that they can specialize in, collect, and trade back and forth. But art as a vehicle for inspiration and for individual creative expression is unparalleled. It's so because it goes back to, if you're making it goes back to Csikszentmihalyi and his books on flow, which you might be familiar with, and the fact that it has, and if you're looking at something, not necessarily any work of art, but certain works of art, like the music at the concert that you attended, will just stop you short and draw you in and rebirth you in a slightly new form. And that, so, that kind of reinvention that kind of getting outside of your own sometimes tired tread and into another more a freshened way of being in the world is a great gift. It's when time stops. It's when we participate, we partake of eternity in that moment.
Yes. So is it fair to say that you see art and the spiritual or the philosophical intersecting?
Yeah, but they're not. But not. You see, one of the I got involved in the art world and art history in the art world, assuming that art was about expressions of the spirit, and then I soon found that in the commodity art world, that wasn't. Spirituality was a dirty word. They didn't even talk about it. They talked about it maybe historically in relationship to Kandinsky or Mondrian or people who had very carefully articulated manifestos about the spiritual and art, and impenetrable documents like Mondrian's. But in terms of at the time when I was getting into the art world in the 80s and the 90s, it was, you wouldn't find, 9 curators out of 10 would never use the word spiritual. So, and certainly, when you think about pop art and, just more, they were much more comfortable with art as social critique, than they were with art as a path to healing or to, union with something or something transcendent or transpersonal. Yeah. Though the artists that I myself, that doesn't mean there weren't any artists that we showed who shared who shared my values. There were some, and they were the ones that I was completely enthusiastic about. I had to work with artists of all stripes, including those who weren't, particularly concerned with spirituality, but the ones that I relished, loved working with the most were the ones where it was I felt like we had a shared understanding of the nature of reality. Yeah.
Well, Peter, you recently completed a manuscript that speaks a lot to how we make meaning in our lives and how we see, how we frame the epochs we live through down to the moment-to-moment experience we inhabit and share with others. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to share some of the key ideas you've been pondering within its pages.
Well, I'm of two minds about that, Sharon. One is that I did write this manuscript, and the first go-around was 300 pages worth of it. But when I shared it with people, and this goes back to what we were talking about with Simon earlier, invariably they said, the readers said, the parts that really sing to me are not the philosophical pages, but the ones where you talk about individuals, when you talk about embodied humans, people, and that it's like we so at our titration, at our level of embodiment, we're so drawn to other people and their level of embodiment. It's like this is the lens at which we like to, we function best. I feel either that or I just wasn't writing in a way that was concrete enough. It was too abstract. I don't want to go into that really in that way. And my task now is to write a different version of that book that is much more fully embodied. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I made some notes on this page, knowing that we were going to be talking today, and I can just give you. I'll throw a couple out, but since this is meant to be a dialogue, I want you to be riffing too. Okay, it's not just an interview, but I'll share some things. First line is the anomaly of individuality and the whole it leaves behind. From a certain point of view, our individuality is just like, it's a surprise. Certainly it was a surprise from the point of view of the oneness, and yet each person pops up with their own, another perfect snowflake, as they say in the current generation. Everybody gets raised as another perfect snowflake. And but the fingerprint, the worldview. I mean, yes, there's so much that is common and that gets socially stratified and in America they say by zip code. I don't know what they say in Australia. You give me a zip code, I'll give you a psychographic profile. I'll tell you what cars they drive, what they want to buy, who they're going to vote for, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's all that stuff that is kind of predictable about social status worldviews, and that ties in with geolocation and economics, pecking orders and things like that, and race. Absolutely. But within that, there's still all that individuality. And so where I'm seeing myself now as I navigate these questions is really, in a sense, on that pool apron. Look, where on the one hand, I'm looking up at the Fool on the Hill, Paul McCartney's song, the Beatles, looking down, so sees the world spinning around. And on the other hand, I'm looking at the people who are, without thinking, but certainly competently and caringly, acquitting their daily duties of making sure that the kids don't get sunburned and, and making sure no one drowns, Yeah. So there's so that triangulation is kind of where I'm sitting right now, as I move ahead. And so I some lines that I wrote down. Can I forgive myself for not being able to decide if I'm an individual or an all, a lowercase I or an uppercase I, for confusing my body and being on the planet? So that's one question. On the other hand, and this goes right back to the Kierkegaard cap, if it's not irreverent, it's not worth bothering.
Sharon has taught me of the power of irreverence.
Exactly. Like we're all co-conspirators behind all that. So that's another level, right? We're all kind of pranksters on a certain level.
But I think whose mission is to say, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up.
Exactly. You realize we're here? Do you realize we're here?
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Sitting there putting sunscreen on your kid. So that's kid needs sunscreen.
So, she's stealing my next line, which is that, and if you're not awestruck, you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I'll just let that one settle for a minute, and we'll circle back. I've got a third one in a minute, but we can just take one at a time.
You guys need to take some breaths.
Deep breaths.
That's the most riotous this podcast has ever gotten, and I love it.
Yeah.
I adore what just happened.
Okay.
Oh, so there's all this. There's the irreverence, there's the awe, and then there's also the sorrow. Finally, Thich Nhat Hanh, without suffering, you don't know how to live. So, all and together, these are many meanings all happening at once.
At once. Yeah. Well, Peter.
Mm-hmm.
I think our work is done.
I have one more question before we finish, but go on, Sharon.
Definitely. Peter, as you know, how we see the world is very much a determinant of the quality of our lives. And I was wondering, what ideas do you have about how we focus our attention and how we can avoid our blind spots, the things we avert our attention from, especially in the moral sphere?
Boy. I'm certainly not one to preach. But I will say that having had the experiences I've had, I have no sense of moral superiority over anybody else. And I certainly don't feel that my life is worth more than anybody else's life. Or that, I feel incredibly blessed to have a garden that I can sit in the back of,
Wow.
And a home that is a shelter in a storm or in cold, and food. I mean, these are incredible gifts, but that doesn't make me any better than anybody. It makes me luckier. And so I have an obligation to pay that forward to other people and to understand, to recognize the circumstances that keep people oppressed, and to work with people who are, and support people who are trying to uplift people who haven't had these advantages. So, that's really big. I mean, that's because if we're all connected and we're all one, then, I'm cutting myself off if I'm saying that, oh, I've got what I need. Don't worry about them. That's ridiculous. Everybody's involved. We're all we're all on this boat, on this journey together.
I redact my question. That's the perfect place to end this.
Redaction.
Peter, I wonder if I might actually read you a couple of poems.
Sure, of course. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd love
Sharon,
to hear
did you
them.
have another question that you wanted to ask?
No, I was just bringing us towards home plate. So I would like you to read your poems and take your time doing so.
Oh, yeah. No.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that, Sharon, because so often I just jump into it and then all over the place. But it just...
Let me just say one more thing, which is that
Please.
The other thing that I would say in response to Sharon's question is, feel your belly. Feel your belly. What advice would you give people to remain sensitive and attuned? Feel both your belly and and your grounding and your feet on the floor, your feet on the ground. Ground yourself, and then feel your heart, and don't just operate and understand if there's fear going on, that fear might be your own projections and might not be what's really happening out there.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
So you got me thinking when you're talking about reverence, irreverence, the importance of both. I'll read a couple of poems. These poems I wrote one after the other. One of them is very reverent, and one of them I've read to Sharon before, and it's very irreverent. And you just got me thinking about this. And so this one is called Mary Cairns Cross, 22nd of the 8th, 2021. Mary Cairns Cross is this beautiful rainforest sanctuary up in the hills near where we live. So I wrote, most people walk through these gardens because it is something to do. You can see it on their faces. They walk on the path as if it were some amusement park ride, of which they were not too pleased nor excited to be participating in. I enter these gardens with no expectation of show, nor with desire to receive anything from the garden. It is because I do not seek to gain that I gain much. I come here to pray, and as I do, the garden whispers deep secrets into my heart. I come here to participate in the dream that is constantly unfolding amongst the ancient trees which have formed the brilliant natural cathedral above me. I come here to listen to the opera that the forest birds now sing with reverence and gusto. I come here to take part in the infinite creation, which now manifests itself as trees, birds, pademelons, clouds, sun, dirt, branches, roots, seeds, and me. It is because I take part that I am welcomed into these mysteries. It is because I feel compelled to record these things that much is left yet unrevealed. So that's the reverent poem.
That's beautiful. And the fact that you included, after your list of different life forms and objects, you included yourself. And you also included the linearity of prose and the open-endedness of the poem that much remains to be revealed, which goes right back to that thought of, to speak is to sin, nothing is as whole as silence. But once you bite into the fruit of the tree of language, you must continue eating until you get to your core.
Can you please continue with that and tell me exactly what you mean by that? Because I know that something important is there, but I didn't quite catch it.
Well, if we think of the fruit of knowledge or the fruit of language, language cleaves the unity of the world by picking one slice, labeling something and picking it out, right? So on the one hand, it's a sin because it's breaking into the fundamental coherence and unity of all, right? So you might, but then the line that I wrote after that back then was, once you bite into the fruit of the tree of language, you continue eating it. You're not just going to go silent in your life. You continue eating it until you get to your own center.
Yeah.
In French, you can say, until you get to its center and your center at the same, and it's the same expression. But in English, you don't have that double meaning. So if you have to pick one, we'll say your center, our center. We continue eating until we get to our center, which means sometimes we throw it away and we just sit among the trees and we take it all in and we let them engulf and overwhelm us and don't say anything and be quiet.
Yeah. Man, that's beautiful. That's powerful. And I think just that image of the fruit of knowledge, language, certainly there's some stuff there that I need to meditate on for a very long time. Because especially studying divinity, I mean, this is the sort of understanding that I want to be having of these sacred texts. And
they don't say, go ahead.
Well, let me ask you about that, coming to your center then. It seems to me there was a moment for me where I was writing a poem that is in The Poet and the Sage, where it's taking you back into the far reaches of the cosmos, looking down how tiny we are, insignificant, but then diving back down and then going within myself into the organs, into the atoms, all the way down to this tiniest part of what makes up me, and realizing that once you get there, you simultaneously pop out the other side again to everything. Yeah, it's like a kind of
like a wormhole.
Exactly. Yeah. Am I on the right track there? Is that?
I'd say.
Okay. Now let me read this other one to you, because it's the most unholy, irreverent poem that I've ever written, and I wrote it right after writing this one. It's called Just Writing. As I sat by the side of the path in the garden, an elderly woman stopped on her way. "Are you drawing?" she asked. "No, I'm writing," I responded. "Oh, just writing." She continued on her way. "Just writing. What a fucking cunt." So that is my moment of just writing. See what you think of this. I'm so sorry.
Oh, it's beautiful. All right.
Well, all true.
That's such a terrible way to end this beautiful conversation, but
no, not at all. Peter, Simon, I just can't thank both of you enough for sharing your ideas, sharing yourselves today. I'm always better off for having spent time with each of you.
I feel like there's still something more to unpack there, in that scene, Simon. It's fascinating. I mean, that question of writing versus visual art is right there, right? She is prioritizing the visual, and she is believing that the only adequate expression of awe, perhaps, or of fellow feeling with these trees in this environment would come through trying to evoke the visual richness that she has come to contemplate and to enjoy and immerse herself in an embodied way. And for her, and even though drawing and writing are both symbolic forms, for her, writing feels like it's a more abstract thing. It's not one-to-one with like that trunk there or that bough, those leaves, these little animals, the worms. You're not taking it all in. You're in your head, man. Get out of your head. This is happening now in this world. You've been plunged into the mulch of nature. God damn it. What are you doing just talking and spinning through sentences in your head for? It feels like there's something like that going on in what was an unduly harsh deprecatory remark on her part, which you, of course, took as a wound, as a barb in that moment, and lashed out back at her because you felt like you were having a profound experience. And she wasn't agile enough, or perhaps compassionate or empathic or open enough to understand that there's more than one way to have a profound experience. In that moment, in that location, in that locale, right? And so there was a fisticuffs, in effect, even if she was already out of the grove by the time you called her a name, But, it's on the other hand, she might respond, okay, you entitled white male, get over yourself.
Well, I have to say,
stop mansplaining.
Well, I'm not 100% sold on whether I'm going to leave that in the podcast, but if I do, I have to explain one thing.
Yeah.
In that moment, I felt absolutely no animosity towards this person, and also I took no harm by what she said. And on top of that, I don't think that she had any intent that was harmful. I think it was an offhanded comment. But the thing that I was trying to do in that poem, if I'm trying to do anything, is prove to myself, I think, that words are not just words. Because if I say something like, you fucking cunt, it hits you. You cannot help but be hit by those words, and they stab you right in the heart, and it's like, why would you say that? That's hard. There's the proof. They're not just words. There's something so profound happening in each word that something like that word can be like so packed full of horrifying meaning. And that, to me, even though I did, and I would never call a person that to their face, and or behind their back, I would never call anybody that name. But the poem is supposed to demonstrate that. That's the power of words, is you cannot help but be offended or delighted. And so I imagine I'll lose a few listeners, but I think I'll keep it in.
Bravissimo.
Yeah.
Well, my friends, bye for now, but love always.
Yes.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Sharon.
Take care of.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Walled Garden podcast. If you'd like to attend any of our free meetups and events, or if you'd like to get one-on-one mentoring with either Sharon Lebell, Kai Whiting, or myself, just go to thewalledgarden.com. But for now, don't forget to nourish those gardens in your mind.